Let's get going. All right, everybody, welcome to the September 29th Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting. This meeting is being held entirely remotely, so all participants are participating via Zoom app. We do not have a YouTube link tonight, so again, members of the public will be on Zoom with us. So just a reminder for everybody to please keep your device muted when you're not speaking so that you're not picked up by the recording and you're not distracting. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand either in your camera window or virtually and wait to be recognized by the chair. When you are recognized, please state your name and any relationship you might have to a project so that we can get that in our minutes. And with that, we will begin tonight's meeting with public comment. Does anybody have public comment here this evening? Does not appear so. We'll move to our next agenda item, the 2021 annual review for the Sconset Beach Preservation Fund Baxter Road project, excuse me, SE 482824. And I believe we have Dwight Dunk on to represent this.
Yes, good evening, Madam Chair, members of the commission. First, I just want to preface that I only received the comments from Greg Berman on Tuesday. On Tuesday, I was also informed about tonight's meeting. I had a previously scheduled appointment commitment for tonight, which I have just recently changed to attend tonight's meeting. With that, I don't have the typical PowerPoint presentation prepared for the annual review, since this was not on my agenda for tonight. But that said, I have a few talking points relative to the annual review. It's primarily on, I think, the most pressing topic relative to the project, and that's has to do with the sand deliveries, etc. So, with this 2021 annual review, as you know, the annual reviews are typically for the calendar year. Historically, the sand years were from April to March. The project had migrated over time. And with that, and prior comments from Mr. Berman, we tried to get that sand year onto a calendar year. With the recent work with the town, working to develop a document the operation and maintenance plan, as well as a sand makeup plan, we have reverted to, or have moved back to having the sand year be April to March. Therefore, the 2021 sand year was just the couple of month period that ended on March 31, 2021. So I just wanted to, indicate that that's why it's a short year. If the, I know Mr. Berman commented that the, sand years have varied over time, and with that, the sand, the required sand delivery, we have never kind of prorated that for a longer or a shorter period of time. Just we've always held that 20,000 yards, whether it be a 2-month sand year or a longer than 12-month sand year. As you know, if you want, I can pull up table 1 from the sand report, if that would be helpful to people.
Yeah, Dwight, if you have visuals you think would be helpful,
yep.
If you want to share screen, I think that is probably a good idea.
Okay, great. I can do that. So everyone can see this table?
Yes, we can see it.
Is it large enough?
I can see, I think on people's screens, they can probably see.
Okay, let's try to make it a little bit bigger, but that got too big. Okay, I mean, as we show here, one thing to, we want to make clear to everybody, certainly in the public, the difference between the sand delivery, which is the sand delivered to the template, and the sand contribution, or that's contributed to the littoral drift system. Those are two separate items that we track. And as we know, in 2021, there was 0 cubic yards delivered for the 2021 sand year, and that resulted in a deficit of sand delivered to the template over the life of the project. We've talked about that before, so that's not new. But one thing that we have talked about that I just want to stress is that the sand contributed to the littoral drift system, which is, the compensatory sand to make up for the fact that the geotubes are in front of the bluff and the bluff cannot contribute sand or sediment to the system. That has not been diminished over time. There continues to be sand, although there was none delivered to the template. There was 11,680 round numbers of sand contributed off the template and onto the beach, which goes to the littoral drift system, yielding a 14 cubic yards per linear foot per year sand contributed to the littoral drift system, which is slightly greater than the bluff contributed to the system before the geotubes were installed. So there has been no deficit of sand contributed to the littoral drift system. But I do want to recognize that there is a deficit of sand that's been delivered to the template over the life of the project. So, that's kind of the, the big point here with the whole sand delivery in tracking for the year. The other elements of the 2021 report, we addressed many of the other topics, but I just wanted to highlight those points. One other point that I wanted to prepare was to note was in the 2021 annual report, we did provide a portion of the sand year, the 2022 sand year sand delivery report, but we had not had the survey completed to look at the contribution of sand to the littoral system. So part of this table was in the 2021 report. This is now from the 2022 sand delivery and contribution report, which we delivered to Jeff by email yesterday, and we also sent it directly to Mr. Berman. In 2021, as we noted, there was the negative 47,471 cubic yards of sand that gets carried up to here. There's the required 20,834 for the compensatory sand volume. There was 20,841 cubic yards delivered for the 2022 sand year. So when we look at that, we have the sand, compensatory sand that's required to be to get up to zero deficit, which is 68,300 cubic yards. The 20,841 that was delivered yields a deficit of 47,464. So the project, in terms of sand delivered to the template, has treaded water, and I know it has been, provided as part of this was the sand makeup plan to address this delta over a 4-year period has been proposed. And with that, with the survey of the bluff and the template, from June, we're able to calculate that there was just over 12,600 cubic yards of sand contributed to the littoral system off the template. So 12,633, which yields a project life average annual rate of 13.9 compared to the 12 that the Bluff 13.9 cubic yards per linear foot per year, compared to what the Bluff contributed of 12 cubic yards per linear foot per year. So I just wanted to close that loop because part of that table had been presented in the 2021 annual report, the sand delivery piece, but not the contribution. So, with that, I understand the order of conditions, the requirements in the order, but when we think about the littoral system, the project has continued to contribute the compensatory volume of sand that would have otherwise been contributed by the Bluff without the geotubes in place. And then just a few high points on some of the comments from Greg Berman. He does identify the irregular periods. We acknowledge that, and we're trying, we've, as I said, we're trying to get to having a 12 of the sand year match the be a calendar year, but working to get it back onto the order of conditions April to March year. So that's why we had this unusually short 2021 sand year. 2022 is a full 12-month sand year from March to April. And I brought up the points of the difference between delivered to the template and contribute to the littoral drift system. Because on page 4, Mr. Berman comments about a deficit in nourishment. And I have a disagreement with that comment. There has been no deficit in the nourishment to the littoral drift system as shown by our reports, by the annual reports, and by the 8-year average now of 13.9 for 9 years. But there is that deficit of sand that should have been delivered to the template. So just, that's just a distinction to be made because we're looking at, the permit requirement versus the natural system. So the project isn't having an adverse effect on the natural system. I do agree with Mr. Berman's comment about the dynamism of the system would overshadow signature of the geotubes. What's the shoreline here, about 6 miles long versus 950 feet of geotubes. So I think the system would overshadow the signature of the geotubes. And in terms of kind of looking at the long-term, his comment here, the long-term and longshore sediment transport and how the geotubes may have a reduction of the available volume. The project was designed and it's being managed consistent with the DEP and the CZM policies for CES projects, and that is to provide compensatory sand to make up for the fact that a CES is in front of the glacial landform of here, in front of the coastal bank, and here it's the glacial landform of the bluff. So that the bluff can no longer give sediment to the system. Sand is trucked, delivered, put on the template, and then when geotubes are exposed, they're recovered so that sand can contribute to the littoral system, where the sand that's coming off the system, the geotube system into the littoral system, is equal to or greater than what was provided by the natural bluff. It's meeting the standards established by DEP and CZM for CESs. So it's not, causing a shortage of sand to the system. So just looking at my notes, those were the high points that I just wanted to identify relative to this. Like I said, since I didn't have a chance to have the traditional 30 slide deck PowerPoint presentation. So it's just a brief review of the, I think, the key items in the annual review. And with that, I'll yield and be available for questions and discussion.
Thank you, Dwight. Perfect. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners regarding Dwight's report, or comments from Greg Berman on the report? Mike?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question on the sand deliveries. If I'm not mistaken, Dwight, you said 68,305 yards were delivered for 2022. And then who monitors the delivery? Is that something that's reported to Jeff, or a representative is available?
No, what I was saying in terms of the table, I'll just share that screen because the tables the tables are a little too complex. too much information in them, I think. Just, briefly to kind of go through some of the high points on the table, the required compensatory sand, which is the 22 cubic yards per linear foot per year, for a 22 cubic yards per linear foot for the system. Early in the project, when it was only about 850 feet, there was a smaller volume needed. After it was lengthened to 950 or 947, it's 20,834 is required annually. Because of the deficit that was carried over from 2021 into 2022, that means to erase that deficit, 68,000 plus 68,300 would have been needed. The 20,000, but 20,841 was delivered, consistent with the sand year requirement, yielding the deficit holding steady. So that just Commissioner Mazzarelli, I just wanted to clarify that point in terms of there wasn't 68,000 delivered, but the contractor does notify Jeff, that the work is occurring. We is part of the protocols that we've been following when the sand that's used for the template comes from an excavation site on island. We get a representative sand sample, run a sieve analysis to make sure it is compatible with the grain size for the beach and the bluff. We also run a what's called an EDR report for the area to just look to make sure that there's no likelihood of anthropogenic contamination of that material. Those are provided to Jeff before the sand is delivered. We only accept sand that meets the grain size analysis, the sieve analysis. And if we think it's free of anthropogenic contamination. If there was a site that, based on the EDR report, and EDR is a vendor that actually prepares all the data and reviews for environmental site assessments that meets the standards for ASTM environmental site assessment. So it's the same type of vendor that a licensed site professional would use for a 21E site investigation. So it's a reputable mechanism for screening. If we were going to use that type of material, then chemical analysis of those sources would be required. but we haven't had any that that the EDR suggested it would be contaminated. When sand is purchased from a sand pit, it's presumed to be clean, so there's no EDR report for that, but there is a sieve analysis conducted for that sand. So those reports, the sieve analysis and the EDR is provided to Jeff before the sand is delivered. And then the contractor monitors the volumes of sand being delivered daily, and that gets tallied so that we can keep track of the cumulative total.
Okay, great. That answered my question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Seth, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have much to say about the 2021 report because the sand year was very short and no deliveries took place, but I'm just wondering, will we also be scheduling a 2022 review since it seems like that sand year is concluded now as well?
The annual review, as I mentioned, is according to the order of conditions and the long-term history of this project. The annual review is typically for the calendar year, so that it reports upon all the monitoring as well as sand deliveries during that previous calendar year. So the 2022 annual review will be prepared after December 31, but we did provide to Jeff and Greg yesterday the 2022 sand delivery and contribution report. That typically does not get submitted out of sync. It usually, even though it's prepared after the March 31 sand year and after the bluff survey and template survey that occurs typically in Q2, because that's what we need to figure out how much was contributed to the littoral system. It's usually prepared, just kind of sits there until it goes in with the annual review. Because of everything that's going on with the project, we did submit it, and we'd be happy to discuss that 2022 sand year delivery and contribution report. I know you all probably haven't seen it yet, but because we just delivered it to the department.
Well, thank you, Dwight. I see Jeff's hand going up. I was going to ask the same question tonight as Seth. I think we've got to find a way to streamline the sand years with your report, so it's all referring to the same 12-month period. I think that's part of the confusion.
I understand, and I'm this has been going on since what the 2014 sand year. That was the protocols that have been in place since 2014 was, we have the sand year, we have the annual review, but they're out of sync. And yes, it does add to some confusion. I'm not going to disagree with you, Madam Chair, but that's the MO that's been followed for 8 or 9 years. So.
Yeah, I think I just thought before the 2021 sand report, we were at like a January to January. So it was almost like we were getting closer. And now I feel like we shifted.
And as I mentioned verbally and what's in the report, we had done that, in terms of how it had evolved and gotten out of that order of conditions, April to March timeframe. We had gone to the calendar year based on comments by Mr. Berman to get it to be a 12-month period again. But with the discussions to bring the project closer, developing the O&M plan and making sure that things were consistent with the order of conditions, which is April to March, the decision was made to get it back to April and March. So this 2021 was just, yes, a couple of months, but 2022 gets back to the order of conditions time period.
Thank you. Jeff, did you have anything to kind of add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the report that got sent in tomorrow. Usually when these reports come in, we take a run through at a staff level to see if make sure there's nothing that's glaring or something contradictory to a record that we have. So we'll hopefully have that to you guys probably midday tomorrow.
Thank you, Jeff.
And the highlight of that was the table that I reviewed as part of this. So that's probably the most important table that's in the report.
Thank you for pointing that out. They are lengthy, so it's good to know where to look first. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? I know, I guess I'm very curious about what has happened since this 2021 report, as the growing sand deficit is very concerning. And I know that you guys stick to your position, that we're still contributing to the system in the way CZM suggests, but our order of conditions with you was written with, some of those entities also weighing in. So it's really, really kind of concerning to see that growing deficit.
Well, as I mentioned, you'll see in the report that the deficit has, because of the full volume delivered for 2022, the deficit is stagnant at the 47 plus thousand right now. And there was a plan prepared and submitted to make up for that over a 4-year period.
Thank you, Dwight. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? No, we'll open it up for public comment. I just want to remind people that we are here to talk about the 2021 annual review and not many of the other issues that have been occurring on the bluff. So that is how I will preface this. But if members of the public would like to raise their hand, happy to call on you. I'm not seeing anybody. Deanne Atherton.
Thank you, Ashley. A question for Dwight, please. Do we know how long the geotubes were uncovered in 2021?
Dwight, do you have any idea of that?
I have to tell you, I don't have the count of the number of days. We provide the annual, we do provide the quarterly work reports, and the geotubes are inspected weekly and after storm events, wave events, and they are recovered typically within the week after they're exposed. So, we're talking a matter of days, depending on the extent of exposure. Sometimes it's just 100 feet, sometimes it's several hundred feet. But we're talking about a handful of days. We did provide, based on some of the previous discussions, the annual report provides information, excuse me, on the strength of the materials that are used for the geotubes and their exposure, and these polypropylene fabric remains very strong even after quite a bit of exposure. The exposure that's tested in the lab is more than the exposure that we've estimated over the time period of these tubes. Just as an example, some of these tubes were used down in New Jersey, and they had been in place before Superstorm Sandy. They've been in place for over 20 years at this point, probably about 25 years. They, similar to this, they get exposed, they get recovered. They have that type of system. They withstood Superstorm Sandy. Just one of the case studies that is out there for these materials. So the question I think is relative to the structural, the strength of these materials, and this material probably still has 90 to 95% of its strength is from when it came out of the factory.
Thank you, Dwight. Any other comments, questions from the public? I am not seeing any. So at this point, if there is no public comment, thank you, Dwight, for presenting the report.
You're welcome.
Again, commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, so Dwight, I expect we will be hearing from you guys in the future about the 2022 report and other issues regarding the project.
Yes. As I think we alluded to in the report, we have as a entity have proposed the O&M plan, proposed the sand makeup plan, and we're looking towards the future is in terms of the next steps for the bluff.
Thank you. We appreciate that. I think acknowledgement of past mistakes is probably the biggest step forward for you guys. But if there's no questions or comments, we will kind of close our conversation about the 2021 annual review. And we have other items on our agenda. So if members of the public want to exit for those, that's fine. If you want to stay on, you're welcome to stay on as well. But we will move on to our orders of conditions. Jeff sent these out earlier.
Yes, I did. Sorry, 1 second. I am getting them open. I was not quite there yet.
Doing the same thing. So first on the list, we have Sunset House LLC at 15 Hollowell Lane.
So when we get into these two, please keep in mind, we just closed these last week. We have 21 days to issue. So if one of them needs any significant fixing or adjustments, we can always issue next week. We don't have to do it this evening. We're still within our 21 days. So to catch up and grab my notes. This was obviously for the bulkhead repair replacement and groin repair replacement on Hallowell. The commission had some questions at the last meeting regarding this project. And we're kind of split about which direction to go. So we put together 2 orders. If it's easier and I think probably more prudent, we can talk about the positive first in an attempt to permit the project, see where that discussion goes, and then can go, if necessary, discuss the negative order as well, if that's okay with you, Madam Chair.
Yes, I think that's great. Thank you, Jeff.
So from my notes last time, the one condition I wanted to kind of highlight first is, that's some weird grammar, but we talked a lot about, and reviewing it, about the old wooden materials that were potentially within the beach and the bulkhead. We tried to address it with condition 24. I spent some time talking to our public health director and then a couple other consulting firms that do this. And it maybe not the best worded, but we can wordsmith it a little bit. But this 24, that should any of the wooden bulkhead materials be removed or exposed in need of removal, they should be tested for PCBs and heavy metals, including methyl mercury, to determine if the treatment material in the lumber. We don't need an if there These test results will be provided to the commission to determine if further action is required. In addition, should the soil in this area, in addition, the soil in this area shall also be tested for these constituents. And specifically with, I know we don't often call out one specific, but methyl mercury is one of the resultants of creosote specifically. So if that's detected, we at least have an idea that creosote may have been one of the constituents that was there originally. We looked and looked, there was unfortunately no just soil test for creosote, right? You just can't test for it. So that's when we started down the list of constituents or byproducts that we get, and methyl mercury obviously is something that's able to enter the system. And then obviously mercury is a pretty well documented history of things like fatty tissue accumulation and things like that. So we think that those two components get to that concern as we go through, just to be sure we know what it is. So with that, I'll run through the rest. I just wanted to take a minute with that because we've never included that condition before. So thought we would. So just to run through the findings that are there, we broke them apart a little bit. We had the commission finds that given historic permits and conditions, the repair replacement of the groin in kind with no expansion or modification qualifies as a pre-existing use. And then a 3, the commission finds that the bulkhead was constructed prior to the enactment of the Wetlands Protection Act and Town of Nantucket Wetlands Bylaw and qualifies as a grandfathered pre-existing use. And then the project also qualifies as a limited coastal project under the provision of state law for limited coastal projects. Then beneath that, we have some of our normal things for fueling outside of the 50-foot for any of the vehicles, sedimentation to be minimized. We included the components that we had on 18 Washing Pond and 6 and 11 Hallowell for the photographs every 2 months for the groin system. We have the quarterly report component with the condition of the groin. Sorry, I want to put in bulkhead. Location of the resource areas and mean high water just to track it. And then the sand accumulation for the 3 consecutive surveys between the groins, since we have a couple on the site. 24 was the condition we've already talked about. And then this 25 we've put on before, that any treatment of the steel sheeting will be improved in writing by commission staff and shall be limited to once per year, because occasionally they do treat those for rust or other things that have come up. That's all I had in my notes for that one, but we can certainly add more or discuss any, but that's kind of what we put together.
Thank you, Jeff. Joe, I see your hand up. Oh, you're muted.
I do have a question, Jeff. On number 24, it says you test the sand material for those constituents, but it doesn't say, what do you do if you find it?
Oh, you're muted, Jeff.
Now, well, I just did what Joe just did. So you know what we'll do is let's take these test results provided to the commission that's in the middle of that. We're going to put that at the end. So now we'll have should any of the wooden bulkhead materials be removed or exposed in need of removal, they should be tested for PCBs and heavy metals, including methyl mercury, to determine the treatment material in the lumber. In addition, the soil in this area shall also be tested for these same constituents. These test results will be provided to the commission to determine if further action is required. So they'll provide the test to you. If it's come back positive, you can have a discussion with the permit holder at that point, what level of remediation is necessary to get the site back into compliance. So it's at the board's discretion at that point, or if there's no results, you certainly can just let it be.
Thank you, Jeff. Mike, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Linda just called into my phone that she's zipping home, so I don't know if it's how it works with the meeting, but I have her here, on my speaker so she can listen, but she's headed home to her computer.
Yeah, I don't think we can count that for remote participation in this situation.
Okay,
Well, I've done it before, but I'm headed home.
she's headed home, so,
Okay, perfect.
okay.
Yeah, as far as I know, I mean, for the most part, they want us on camera, on screen, so I don't know. I think that opens up a can of worms I don't want to open up. But thank you, Mike. Any other questions, comments, amendments to the positive order? And remember, even if you think you would vote for the negative order, you can still work to make the positive as strong as you feel like it can be, which I have certainly done in the past. But if there's no other comments on this one, Jeff, should we run? Oh, Seth?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. About condition 25, treatments to the steel sheeting. What type of treatment are we talking about? And can we set a limit on those? Or are we just fine with approving individual requests at the staff level? Like, are they doing chemical treatment? Or are they just scraping it off? I'm not really familiar with that.
Yeah, some of it is just like rust removal or rust treatment on the steel. We did limit it to once per year, so they do get one request per year if there's going to be treatment. If it would make people feel better, we could put any treatment of it to be improved by writing by the commission, and then they could bring that request to the board as like a maintenance request and describe what it would be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a good idea, because similar to Seth, I wasn't aware that this would need treatment.
They typically don't. It's only come up a couple times before. I mean, we can remove that condition altogether, and then if they need to do something, they'd have to apply.
I'm fine with keeping it in, but I think it should come to the commission. We're talking about an annual request. It's not a whole lot of extra work on our behalf.
Thank you for bringing that up, Seth.
A second, let me. So we have any treatment of the steel sheeting. Sorry. All right, so just rewriting it, they put any treatment of the steel sheeting will require a written request to the commission describing the treatment and extent of the treatment and shall be limited to once per year. Does that make sense to everybody?
I like it. Seth, I see your hand up.
That is fine with me. I do have a question about another condition number, if that's okay. So for 21, the photographs that they're required to provide, I think that's great. And I think the date and time and the tide cycle is great. But I'm wondering if we can go beyond that and maybe have them update the mean high water survey at a more frequent basis as well. I don't know if it has to be every 2 months, but potentially twice a year, because the whole photographs are somewhat relative, but the whole point of these groins is essentially to hold sand and extend the mean high water mark seaward. So, we won't really know that unless data is being taken, and I would advocate that we require them to take that data.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think how to make that better. Anyone have any suggestions to that? Because I see what you're saying, so I'm just trying to think of how to write that best.
No, I totally agree with what Seth's saying. My brain is a little bit spent.
Well, if they're, just trying to think this out a bit. So if they're doing it quarterly, they're updating essentially the location of the resource areas and the high water line every 3 months. Do we want to, you could shorten it to match the every 2 months of the photos.
No, I think the quarterly surveys are fine. I mean, it's way more than we're gonna get in almost every project. Typically, we get a mean high water survey like once in decades or once in years when somebody wants to do something for a project. So any data is better than what we're getting currently.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Seth.
Let me think about it for a minute though and see if I can't
Wordsmith it out.
come up with something else.
Mike, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a procedural question. I've never seen where we have a positive and a negative order of conditions. Like how does that work from the meeting standpoint? You discuss both of them, or you vote on one individually? Thank you.
That's a good question, Mike. Somebody would make a motion to vote on one or the other, and if one passes favorably, that's where we'd end up essentially. Many times we would discuss both depending on where the commission is falling. And that, gives somebody the opportunity to make a like a conscious decision.
Okay,
And
thank you.
an
Appreciate it.
informed decision is what I was trying to say. That's a good question. Any other thoughts on the positive order?
Again, if there are questions, like I said, we don't have to issue tonight. We still have time, but I know.
Yes,
Ian?
thanks. Have we determined whether or not it was substantially improved after 78? So in fact, it isn't entitled to statutory protection? Because I didn't realize we were going to be deciding till next week. So do we have an answer on that?
The bulkhead itself, Ian?
No, the house. Because the end scar is absolutely staggering to the west. And so, but I don't have an answer to that, whether or not.
So if you give me 1 second, Ian, let me bring up my notes on this, because I figured it out. But it will take a second here to pull it out here.
Thank you, Jeff. Linda, I see your hand up.
I think I had the same question on the other one we did last month about tying this array to a structure. I thought if it predated the enactment of the relevant laws, it was grandfathered all on its own without being tied to a structure. Because I believe that's why the other one passed. Is that not correct? Or are we still arguing about that fact?
I think that's what we have settled on. I know that's my understanding, that in this case, they're looking to maintain the structure itself, which is grandfathered, but I think Ian's question is still a good question for the overall project area. And it might also allow commissioners to think a little bit more about the alternatives and their value if, the house isn't necessarily needing the same sort of protection. So I
A
think,
question about that. If they've been maintaining it, which they have said that they have, and it predates the relevant laws, they're entitled to continue to maintain it, whatever that happens to be. And I thought we got an opinion from the state on the fact, I think Jeff said the last time that they have seen changes in materials and things like that on other projects that have come before them. Isn't that where we were last week?
yeah, I think Jeff talked to people at the state and they said they see this swap out frequently, but they didn't say that we couldn't ask for alternatives and some of the language that, is asked for in kind of relevant wetland protection bylaws, et cetera.
Yes, and if I may, we have yet to get a legal opinion.
Yes, we have not heard from town council. Seth, I saw your hand go up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I was going to say, we don't have any legal opinion. We don't have any case law. And although relevant to the situation, a lot of the concerns about this project are specifically related to our unique performance standards within the Nantucket wetlands regulations, which are different than elsewhere around the state, the local bylaw and the local regulations, which even if the structure, the groin and bulkhead itself did qualify for pre-existing use, there are still these performance standards that can be read to pierce the veil of that pre-existing use. That's the, no bulkheads, groins, or coastal engineering structures may be rebuilt after 878 unless without considering a more environmentally friendly alternative. So I know everybody has their own legal opinions about whether that holds up or not. But if we consider hypothetically that it just does, then that's what we'll have to meet the burden of proof over, or that's what the applicant will have to come to burden of proof for.
Thank you, Seth. Mark?
Mark, you were muted for that. Sorry.
Yeah, I think he's trying to unmute.
There, thank you. I was struggling. Actually, my apologies. I have a obligation I must be at very shortly. I'm going to be bowing out of the meeting in about a minute or two. 1,000 apologies. I thought we were talking about just this Wisconsin Beach thing, and then the draft orders came up, and I'd already committed to being somewhere tonight, and I have to go. 1,000 apologies, but this is a big one too. I would love to have a chance to discuss both the positive and negative, but I have to go.
Okay. Well, we understand we have lives out there, right? So thank you, Mark.
Like I said, if we want to have more time to talk about it, I mean, we can take edits to both and keep it on for our regular meeting next Thursday too. That's fine.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fine either way. I think it would be good to go through both orders just because you wrote them and we have members who feel strongly on either side.
Okay, so we can do that, or if people just want to take time to read it and email comments into me directly without replying all, we can certainly do it that way and carry it on our agenda for what is the next meeting, October the 6th.
Yes.
Whatever people want to do.
Thank you, Jeff. Mike, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to discuss them both, but I think it would be fair to Mark if we essentially take no action tonight and wait another week. Just my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. That is totally fine with me. I know I think this was our shot at having maybe a full commission on this one. But it just doesn't always work out that way. So that's where we are. So Jeff, I think you were maybe wordsmithing one of the conditions.
No, I think we had the positive pretty set, so I didn't really make any more changes to it.
Okay. Well, I guess let's move on and look at the negative, and allow commissioners who are here to comment in real time and kind of ask questions. And then we'll go from there.
Get that up. So, all right, so I know we haven't seen one of these for Mike and Joe. So negative orders function a little bit differently than positive orders, right? So essentially what the commission does in negative orders is we make a series of findings that the applicant failed to meet a burden of proof to a specific performance standard. So we kind of go through the relative performance standards, kind of resource area by resource area. Excuse me, I'm gonna cough. So I'll just kind of give an example here because this is a lot to read. And I just don't think anyone wants to hear me read all of these to them because that would be really awful. So we make a series of findings in the first part where which resource areas are available. And then I'll just do the town section just as an example. So if we look at this additional finding 10 on the second page, the commission finds that the coastal bank is significant to the protection of the following interests: flood control, erosion control, storm damage prevention, wildlife and wetland scenic views. So that's kind of a direct copy from the actual regulations. And then where that comes into play later is when you get down to like number 16, where you would have the finding, the commission finds that the applicant has not met the burden of proof to demonstrate compliance with section 390-10B3, which is the coastal bank section of the regulations, that all projects shall be restricted to an activity as determined by the commission to have no adverse effect on bank height, bank stability, wildlife habitat, vegetation, wetland scenic view, or the use of the bank as a sediment source. So you're essentially copying that performance standard out and saying that the information that was provided didn't adequately describe that no adverse impact was going to be had by the project. Does that kind of make sense to everybody, how these function? And then, like I said, I won't torture anyone with the like 20-point reading here because it's boring. So a lot of legalese words, but that's how they function.
Thank you, Jeff. Seth, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to Jeff for clarification. So number 14 is the performance standard for coastal bank, and then number 15 is the performance standard for coastal beach. Is that correct?
Switch the bank and the beach, and
Okay.
yes, that is correct. So number 14, 397, 390-7, just to make that clear, that is the section that is coastal beaches, and 390-10 is coastal bank. So going through performance standard by performance standard, because in this case, we have the structure that's located within both. So it abuts both those directly.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the structure, the groin structure, is also located within land under the ocean. So we would need the performance center for that too, correct?
Correct. Let me switch screens here really quickly. Why did I do that? So let me just get to the correct one here. Oh, yeah, apologies. Sorry, I missed it. So we would want to also include 390-6B7 in there. So I would put that, actually, we'll bump it down because I try to keep them in order. So. So now there would be a new 14. That would be 390-6B7. Ooh. So now there's essentially those same three kind of performance standards in the row. So the first one is land under the ocean, 390-7 coastal beach, and then 390-10 coastal bank. Well, I'll send an updated version out to everybody when we finish up, since it doesn't sound like we're voting this evening. So
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I'm looking at the small print on my screen and trying to follow, but it's been a long day. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I guess I have a general comment, maybe a question. So all of the performance standards that talk about this 878 having to provide a more environmentally friendly plan or more environmentally friendly solution. I think those are good to include, but I personally don't disagree with the applicant's points that the coastal engineering structure itself is eligible to receive the benefits of pre-existing use. So some of the things like 16 and 17, although I agree in most projects that they would apply, I'm not sure that they apply here. My main point for potentially being in opposition to a positive order is that those conditions that talk about having to solve this issue with the more environmentally friendly solution pierce the veil of pre-existing use. So even if the structure is eligible for pre-existing use, they would still have to meet those requirements. And we haven't had an appropriate amount of alternatives analysis or plans submitted to show how they could meet that requirement. I don't know if that's vague or not, but it's really specific to those performance standards themselves.
I know what you're saying. I don't know how, and I can see Jeff thinking how to capture that.
let me think about that, Seth, because that's helpful to hear. And let me see. I think listening to performance standards is still important for it, but I think what I may try to do is in kind of the discussion piece at the end of the draft order, maybe capture what you just said in like a written way to better describe why those are there. Does that make sense?
Sure, and maybe this isn't a legally logical point, and maybe we'll change my mind about how we proceed forward because I hear the opposition saying, well, how can one performance standard be valid if the other performance standards aren't valid? And I think it's very specific as to how those performance standards were written, that they were made purposefully and legally reviewed at the time that the regulations went into place, that they were made purposely for this exact situation we're having right now, that they would encompass pre-existing use, even if the other performance standards didn't encompass pre-existing use. So the applicant will say something like number 16 the project doesn't have an adverse impact or can't have an adverse impact on bank height, bank stability, et cetera. Well, they'll say, we don't need to meet that performance standard. But I think the ones that talk about these environmentally more friendly alternatives need to be met, whether there's a pre-existing use or not, based on the way that they were written.
Thank you, Seth. Mike, I see your hand up, and then Ian, I saw your hand go up.
So yes, Mike, would you allow me 15 seconds, please?
Sure.
Thank you very much. So Ashley, unfortunately, I'm in exactly the same position as Mark. And I had made a 6 o'clock appointment because I didn't realize this was going to continue. So I also have to bow out, and I apologize to my fellow commissioners. And yeah, I've been hanging on, and I'm 7 minutes overdue already. So please forgive me, and to be continued from my point of view. Bye-bye.
All right, bye, Ian. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right,
Um,
Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess my question would be through you to Seth, perhaps. When we're talking about more environmentally friendly solution, I'm just curious what we have in mind on that with, when you talk about driving steel sheeting, it seems like that's a minimal disruption to the area. Of course, I realize it's steel against water at some point, but just curious what my fellow commissioners have in mind for a more environmental friendly solution, and that might just help my brain get through the discussion as well.
If I may.
Yep, go ahead, Seth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if you think about the gradient from our coastal protection from soft all the way up to hard structures include things like bulkheads, revetments, coastal engineering structures, etc. And then all the way back down. And the softest thing would be like beach nourishment and planting. And things in between would be, living shorelines, oyster reef, fiber roll, kawara, things like that, where there's still some physical, support being added to the beach and bank, but you're doing it with materials that are meant to degrade and be more natural over time. So really more natural or naturalized solutions is what we're talking about, that are going to be more resilient to sea level rise and less polluting to the environment.
Thank you, Seth. Linda, I see your hand up.
Did we ever resolve the issue of the creosote? Because you had asked that question, Ashley, if there was creosote down underneath there. I didn't know if they had resolved that issue.
Yeah, I think, Linda, that was probably before you hopped on, but in the positive order, Jeff has a condition to test different materials for methyl mercury and some of the other chemicals that would typically come off of like a creosote structure.
Because that's what they used up and down that beach when I was a kid. So I'm just curious if we've gotten that far, but I appreciate that's in the positive order. I saw that, but I didn't know if we had actually gotten an answer before that. Through you, Madam Chair, to Seth, I would think that ripping this out would actually cause a significant amount of damage as opposed to what they have planned, but regardless of the creosote issue. And natural plantings have not worked out there. There's too much movement up against the bank. And I'm not exactly sure about what they've used in Pocomo working there at all. It's a different environment entirely. And I understand we're supposed to look at safer alternatives, but I think in these locations up there, I am not that certain that that's going to work. So I'm still on the positive side.
Thank you, Linda. I think it all really depends on the time scale you're looking at with these. And I think the idea of switching to more environmentally friendly is just kind of a longer lasting into the future, and understanding that ultimately all of these are either going to be ripped out or left to the ocean. And this just kind of allows for, I think, a smoother transition. But Seth can answer for himself. So go ahead, Seth.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm not going to answer for myself. I'm going to answer generally because it isn't really up to us as a commission or even as individual commissioners to decide what we think is going to work. It's up to the applicant to prove without, beyond any possibility that there's nothing they could possibly do to make it work there. They have to go above and beyond and go through every single alternative and show specifically why none of those could work to have the same level of protection that the property has now. And although I'll admit that, some alternative analysis has come in, my point is that it's not substantial enough and it's not robust enough to really show us if there's a suitable alternative. I think I've made my point clear about what I think long-term needs to be in this situation. But even in the short term, we don't have enough information to make an appropriate decision here without the applicant providing a more robust set of alternatives and data to back it up.
Thank you, Seth. Linda, I see your hand up.
That was my, that was gonna be my recommendation, is that we carry this over. How much time, through you, Madam Chair, to Jeff, how much time do we have?
We'll have two more weeks on this one from tonight.
Okay, so whatever we do, we're gonna have to have answers or figure out what we're gonna do next week, or they have to withdraw it, is that correct?
Then it's, I believe, like an automatic approval if we don't issue something. Is that correct, Jeff?
Yeah, they could get a constructive approval that way, but I think that, so we just closed it last week, we're at 7 days, 14, we'd actually have one more week, we could have a special hearing if we really had to.
Can they put in more information? We've closed the hearing, we'd have to vote to reopen the hearing.
I think they'd have to apply to do that. I can figure that out to know what that process would be.
Because if we have these questions that Seth is raising and the issue with the creosote may not be solved by that, except for in the positive to check it. That's, we're sort of, our backs are against the wall at the moment. Is that correct? To make a decision in a timely manner.
Well, we have 21 days, so yes.
They did, I mean, Seth brought this point up about alternatives during the hearing, so the applicant certainly had a chance to submit that material had they wanted to. Seth, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to say the same, and without getting too deep into the theoreticals of what will and will not happen, but if a negative order was issued, the applicant still does have the ability to come back and submit a new notice of intent with that new information. I mean, we would have to, figure out the rehearing limit and see that appropriate information had come in, but they still do have the possibility to provide that information in a new notice.
Thank you, Seth. So at this point, because we are going to carry this one over, I think we've decided. Any other additions to the negative order? Any thoughts? Joe?
I did read it, both the positive and negative, before this meeting. And I was really impressed by all the information on the negative side. It was well presented.
Thank you.
That doesn't mean I'm voting negative. It just means it was very well done.
We are lucky to have Jeff.
Yes.
I
Seth?
try to write good decisions, whether they're positive or negative. So I'd like to keep our good record intact.
Seth, I saw your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And Jeff does write excellent orders. I have a question to Jeff. I know there was a request for legal services associated with this project. Is there any chance that services will have been rendered within the next 14 days, or are we kind of hoping or making our decision and then seeing what happens after?
Well, once we had closed the hearing, that kind of got paused. Let me see if I can't quickly reactivate that. So we'll see. I'll have an answer before the next meeting for sure on where that sits.
I
Thank
feel like-
you.
Yeah, the town council tap got like turned off on the commission.
Oh,
Like-
no, it was going, and then we closed the hearing. So once we close it, we don't typically keep pursuing things for hearings that have been closed. So I'll see where it is, because that may have been underway.
I appreciate that, and thank you, and sorry for interrupting, Madam Chair, but if town council, listens to my rhetoric and says it's legally not valid, then I'll stand down for my position and, vote to approve this order. But if in the absence of that, if we're left to decide on our own, I think there is a case to be made. And I feel hesitant about not moving forward because of what we expect. So, I would look for a legal service or a legal opinion. And if it's not provided, then I still think I'll have to voice my opposition to the order and see what comes next.
Thank you, Seth. All right, so if there are no further thoughts on these, we'll continue and hold them over until, I guess it's October 6th, next Thursday. And when I say these, I mean the 15 Hallowell Lane. Because I'm assuming we'll look at the other draft orders tonight.
It's totally up to you guys.
I think we're here and we can just get them off our plate, is my feeling. So we have Rabbit Run Road 1 LLC at 26 Rabbit Run Road.
So this was the project. This was Brian Mann's project. Sorry, from my notes really quickly. This was the project with the renovation. This had the deck that was going to get the porch over a small portion of it, and then the deck was going to be reduced in size. There was some cantilevered balconies, and this was the one that also Mike identified that we were trying to get the deer browse out of the way, and the cedars. So you guys had requested some things related to adequate spacing on the decks and balconies, and then some survivability and restoration conditions. So we included our standard fill provision, our regular photo monitoring for the 75% regrowth of natives within the first 2 years and 6 months of the permit. 22, the wooden decking on the cantilevered overhangs and balconies shall have adequate spacing to allow for water to pass through. And that, I think, was it.
Jeff, do we need our lighting condition on this one?
Sure, we can put a 23 all exterior lighting
That was the
So,
dark skies thing and
the-
downlit.
directed downward and away from the resource areas.
Seth,
So
I see
the-
your hand up.
Yes, I think recently we've been amending that to reference the bylaw code that has the full regulations or full lighting requirements, I guess.
It's the dark skies regulation.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's like an advisory group, but within the town, there's actually a lighting
No, it's
code.
the bylaw. It's dark skies bylaw.
Mhm.
No advisory there. They're hard and fast because I just made a complaint on one.
Outdoor lighting. So it would be chapter 102 of the Code of the Town of Nantucket and be in
Yep.
compliance with chapter 102 of the Code of the Town of Nantucket. That is the outdoor lighting bylaw.
Yep.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on this one? Questions, amendments? If not, would somebody like to make a motion to issue as amended?
I'll make that motion, Madam Chair.
Motion made by Linda, seconded by Mike. So by roll vote, Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Mizzarelli,
Aye.
Landowski. Oh, we can't hear you, Joe.
Aye.
Perfect. Williams.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously. And that moves us on to the Jeffrey H. Johnson Trust at 131 Wallwinnet Road.
This is the one I have to recuse from.
Okay, thank you for that reminder, Linda.
All right, so just to run through, this was the elevation of the structure. We've previously permitted the parking space and walkways. There's a slight tweak to the walkways to get to the steps and some steps. So we called that out. So I included the restored areas and then the fiber grate driveway conditions again from the kind of the previous order. Excuse me. 20, all mats used to protect vegetation during construction shall be removed on a nightly basis and not left in place when not in use. And all machinery shall be stored outside of the 25-foot buffer zone. The same photographs and regrowth as the previous one. This 23, the fiber grate walkway shall not have a handrail or something specific. And then I just added the same condition we put on the last one, that all exterior lighting shall be directed downward and away from the resource areas and be in compliance with chapter 102 of the Code of Nantucket, because I thought that this was another one where the lighting was good.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions, comments, or amendments? Looks like no. So if somebody would like to make a motion to issue as amended. Motion made by Joe. Is there a second? Seconded by Seth. So by roll vote, Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Mizzarelli. Oh, you're muted.
Aye. Sorry.
You, no problem. Landowski.
Aye.
All right, so that carries with Commissioner Williams recused.
Isn't it going to be great at some point when we never hear the word mute or Zoom again?
I think
Okay.
they're here to stay, but I agree. So technology can be exhausting. Seth,
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
perfect. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, I think everybody seconded that one. So by roll vote, Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, I, Mizzarelli,
Aye.
Landowski,
Aye.
Williams.
Aye, and another well-run meeting, Madam Chair.
Oh, thank you, Linda. And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Next week.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Aye.
Bye.